Good day, everyone. Can we all hear me? Hello, good day, everyone.
Yes, I can hear you again.
All right.
Hello, good evening.
Everyone. Okay, thank you.
Good
welcome
evening.
you all. Good evening. I welcome you all to the third edition of a monthly capacity building training. Please kindly mute your mic, everyone. Thank you. So I welcome you all to the third edition of our monthly capacity building training series that is hosted by C21st, which is an NGO responding to the challenges of the 21st century. My name is Odediji Jumoke, the program officer for C21st and the officer in charge of the Committee of Practice platform on climate finance and the GCF. This monthly capacity building training is for the Committee of Practice platform and everyone to build capacity on engaging with climate finance and the GCF processes in Nigeria. It is also to train everyone on how to contribute to climate actions and get involved in the GCF processes in Nigeria. So welcome you all to today's edition, and shared on my screen is the agenda for this training. All right, what we have on the agenda is welcome, which I've done, and an introduction to this training. On today's edition of the training, we have a seasoned speaker who is the CEO of the Global Youth Climate Action Fund Institution, and she will be taking us on the topic of understanding the UNFCCC Climate Finance. Before I invite our speaker, I would like to call on the Executive Director for Center for 21st Century Issues to give an opening remark in person of Ms. Titilope Ngozi-Akosa.
Hello,
Hello,
everyone.
are you there?
Yes, I'm speaking on her behalf. She has told me that she's somewhere. So, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Executive Director, Ms. Titilope Ngozi-Akosa, she has asked me to speak in her capacity for today's capacity building training for participants. So, we'd like to welcome everyone to today's program. And we have started this in the past couple of months. And this is a training session that will run through the year, through various months, where we'll be having different speakers training participants on what climate finance is all about and the activities surrounding Green Climate Fund processes in Nigeria. So we look forward to equipping many persons, especially those in our community of practice, with the required knowledge on what they need to know or what they need to understand about climate finance. And in the build up to COP27, which will be happening later in the year too, part of our advocacy, like I've always said, will be how we can pool or mobilize awareness concerning climate finance for women. And in the last couple of months, we have had different reports concerning climate crisis in the world globally. And all of these reports shows that things are not right at the moment. And our efforts as individuals, which comes together as collective effort, is what will go a long way to solve the this climate crisis. So concerning this training, we'll be having different speakers who will be doing different presentations all through these processes, and we want you all to get familiar with the lectures so that going forward you'll be able to interact, especially with the organization, because all of this is what is needed to understand what is happening. So when you get the basic idea, like today now, what we're having now is the understanding the UNFCCC Climate Finance. So having this understanding makes you know what goes on at Conference of Parties, that's COP, that we always have every year, especially the one coming up in COP27 in Egypt. So that's just basically what we'll be doing. And so because our organization has the capacity or has that mandate to train local women on climate activities and how they can get funds to fund their climate projects. So we are using this vital capacity training to push people out also to understand what we do in our organization. So thank you all for coming for today's program, and it's my hope that you also learn one or two things, not just one or two things. You will learn basic things from our speaker who has been outlined for today's program, and we also look forward to you interacting and engaging with what is happening too, because it's not just enough for you to learn, you also need to interact. What are the gray areas you do not understand, and what you want us to do as an organization to also simplify all of this for you. So thank you very much, and once again, welcome.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lao, for the opening remark. And next on the agenda, we'll be having a presentation on our topic today, which is understanding the UNFCCC Climate Finance. And we have today our speaker, a seasoned speaker, Dolphin Majero. I don't know if I pronounced that well, forgive me. All right, I'll be running through Dolphin's short profile before I invite her to give a presentation. Okay, Dolphin is the co-founder and CEO of the Global Youth Climate Action Fund. She has supported youth in climate action since 2016, where she volunteered as a member of the African Youth Initiative on Climate Change. She has since then engaged with the International Youth Climate Movement Government of Kenya, Climate Change Directorate, National Treasury and Planning, Climate Finance and Green Economy Unit. As an AYIC Kenya volunteer, she has engaged with non-state actors such as PACJA, KCCWG, CARE Kenya, Transparency International, EFS, ICASA, among others. She aspires to be an environmentalist and has also worked a bit of research in Tana River County, looking at projects that deal with climate change with focus on the Tana Delta and ecosystems interlinks within the county. She is also affiliated to the ECOS platform and is familiar with the Green Champion concept. As an AYIC Kenya volunteer, she's currently working towards establishment of a global independent fund institution to support young people to access climate finance across the globe, as well as to foster intergenerational partnership with governments, CSOs, private sector, and international organizations. I want to welcome Dolphin to give a presentation on the topic, understanding the UNFCCC Climate Finance. Thank you. Dolphin, you're welcome.
Thank you for this particular opportunity. I hope we can all be able to hear me. So I will just jump right into my presentation. I don't know if I will be allowed to share. I can see I'm not allowed to share. I don't know if you'll be able to support me in that.
Yeah, I will be sharing my screen. I will share the presentation right away.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invite. I think I've interacted with Titi, I think from Bonn. I think, yeah, that was SB 50 something, 52 or something, 50 actually. Yes, so I'm here to walk you through a bit of basics about climate finance and within, of course, the UNFCCC processes. I don't know if we can take it to presentation mode. There's supposed to be a mode where you can put your presentation, but that's still okay. So like I've been introduced, so I'm working to set up an independent fund institution. So I'm not looking to set up an NGO or something of the sort, but I'm looking to set up an entity that could, of course, support young people to access climate finance basically for basically across the globe. So this initiative is something we've been working on since June of 2020, and it has, developed and evolved over time. So we can move right into the next slide. So there is our website. Of course, we can find it. And then we can move on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Hello, can you move into the next slide? I don't know if you can hear me. Can we move into the next slide?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm on it.
Okay. Okay, so this is just a bit of background information. I think what many people sometimes fail to understand, they look at climate change as an independent sort of agenda. Well, we need to remember that the discussions around climate change and climate finance did not begin with the UNFCCC processes. So back in 1972, basically at the Stockholm Conference on Environment, on Human Environment, the global community basically took note of the changes that were occurring in the environment due to activities of mankind. I think this is the time of famous environmentalists like Rachel Carson and Silent Spring. So she had made a lot of noise on basically the dangers of development to the environment. And that one in 1972, the global community began to basically take note of the issue. So it was at this meeting that it was proposed that the global community should meet again to set a date and discuss this issue basically in depth, basically, because in 1972, it was basically a mention. They basically took note, but at this particular meeting, they said they needed basically a meeting to deeply look into this. And this would be done at the Agenda 21 World Meeting, also called the Rio Conference or the Earth Summit. This was held in Rio in 1972. So people met under the umbrella of United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. And this 1992 was the baseline year for basically all environmental issues at the global level. Baseline year because it gave birth to the 3 Rio Conventions. That's the Convention on Climate Change, Biodiversity, and Convention to Combat Desertification. There's also a statement on forest basically. So this is the first time the international community sat down and began to basically unpack the environmental agenda in depth, and climate change was, of course, part of that particular agenda. And of course, it was agreed when people talk about climate finance, they don't get the story from the root cause. When you talk about climate finance, it came from environmental finance, because in 1992 in Rio, it was agreed that parties would domestically mobilize 60% of resources they need to address these issues. And the international community would, of course, mobilize the other 40% that was needed to address the issues. So you can see even at this early stage in 1992, basically, the issue of environmental finance was starting to be coined, basically. So, and then you can look at the issue of co-financing that has come really handy, basically, because you're looking at the parties contributing to 60%, and of course, the other, the international community contributing 40%. So as a result, the GEF was set up. That's the Global Environmental Facility. So the GEF, I think, as many of you know it supports all the conventions, the UNFCCC, CBD, UNCCD. Basically, yeah, we can move to the next slide. Next slide, kindly. Can we go to the next slide? Are you able to? Yes. Next slide. We've stopped screen sharing for some reason. I don't know. I could do it on my end. I don't know if I had access so that, yeah, yes. Okay. So basically, is that the next slide? I think there should be a slide before that. There's a slide before that. Yes, the next, yes, that one, that's the next slide, yes. Yes, so basically, as I've taken you through, we came from Rio, basically where we had the 3 conventions, and now we're talking about unpacking the Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. And basically, you're looking at the UNFCCC, of course, was established in 1994, I think, Bonn. That was, I think, when the first, it was in 1995 is when the first conference of parties was held. The previous slide, kindly. The next slide after that. Slide number 3, yes. Okay, yes. So basically, the UNFCCC has 2 key conventions or agreements. So that's the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. So Kyoto Protocol, when the international community first basically met in Bonn, they needed a framework of engagement of how they're going to tackle issues of climate change. And the first protocol was, of course, it's called the Kyoto Protocol. So the Kyoto Protocol was designed to support implementation of the agreement, and GCF for a good period of time served as the financial mechanism under this particular protocol, because GF was looking at the overview, the overall financing for environmental issues. So to support implementation of basically this particular convention, the GEF, that's the Global Environmental Facility, they set up 3 particular funds. So there's the Least Developed Countries Fund, the Special Climate Change Fund, and the Adaptation Fund, basically. So basically, when you look at the GEF, is supporting 3 conventions. That's the UNFCCC, CBD, and of course UNCCD, the Convention on the Certification. So for under basically issues of climate change, they set up 3 funds: the Least Developed Countries Fund, the Special Climate Change Fund, the Adaptation Fund. So basically, this one was looking to support engagement on issues of climate change. And under the Convention on Climate Change, the protocol, the Adaptation fund, of course, is looking to support adaptation initiatives and initiatives, especially for developing countries. And under the first, we have the first and the second Kyoto commitment period. So under the first Kyoto commitment period, financing was going to be mobilized from share of proceeds under the CDM. So this is where these discussions on Article 6 basically come in. So you can try to first start to understand how Article 6 starts to relate from with issues of climate finance. Then in the second commitment period, it was agreed that, of course, 2% of share proceeds from the international trade emissions trading and joint implementation will also be provided basically under this particular convention. Next slide, sorry. Next slide, please. Yes, so this went on, and we all know that we've sort of, the discussions around climate change have moved from the Kyoto Protocol to, of course, the Paris Agreement, because basically when you look at the Kyoto Protocol, it didn't sort of serve the needs of the developing countries. You'll find that most countries were locked out of the Kyoto Protocol, basically, because you'll find it's only a few African countries that managed to have any benefits of the CDM, basically, projects and initiatives. So the developing countries sort of felt a bit of locked out of this particular convention. So you can imagine within the first commitment period, and I don't think we deeply understood, as we understand today, the issues of climate change. So at COP15 in Copenhagen, that should be in 2010, there decided to be a shift in discussions and engagement on negotiations of climate change and climate finance. So of course, this is because, of course, people are starting to realize that there was failure by the Kyoto Protocol to meet the needs of the developing countries. So discussions around the 1.5 degrees temperature target, as well as the $100 billion began to be proposed, basically. And like in the Rio conference in Copenhagen, basically, it set a pathway for the establishment of four new bodies. That's the Copenhagen Green Climate Fund, which is the today's Green Climate Fund, a mechanism on red plants, and high-level panel to study implementation on financial provisions. So these were some of the outputs that were there in 2009. Copenhagen, I think COP15 was in 2009. And then COP, basically, this agenda would of course be agreed, because we know how negotiations go. Basically, these negotiations, if we have an issue that has of course been proposed, it's going to be followed up in the next particular COP. So at COP 10, basically in Cancun in Mexico, which was where the COP was held, the Green Climate Fund was finally established and recognized as a mechanism under the convention. So it was this particular finance that today supports the Paris Agreement, basically. So I'll come to the Paris Agreement shortly. Next slide. Yes, so like we've said, the Green Climate Fund was established in 2010. So basically, I was supposed to give you a roadmap I would give a roadmap to the Paris Agreement. It began, of course, in Copenhagen, Cancun, and then a couple of COPs until we got to Paris. But of course, the GCF, like we said, was established, I won't go into that, established in 2010, and is the main financing entity of the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement, because you can see discussions in Copenhagen talked about 1.5 temperature goal, the $100 billion funding, basically. And we can see that after that, of course, the GCF was proposed to basically support implementation of this particular journey, of this particular agenda. So currently, it is the largest multilateral climate fund and has approved over 10 billion US dollars in funding. I think these numbers have gone up, I think, in the last couple of months, should be. So basically, the GCF has a four-pronged approach. So the first one is enabling environment for climate action. The second one is accelerating climate innovation. The third one is de-risking investment to mobilize climate finance at scale. The third one is aligning finance for sustainable development. Just to explain just but a few, enabling environment for climate action, basically it means that do you basically align with your national goals, basically national plans like the NDCs. Has your country set the policies and enabling environment to attract financing, basically? So GCF looks at that. And then accelerating climate innovation, we don't need to look at that. And then the third one is de-risking investment to mobilize funds at scale, because you look at some of the issues that touch on climate change and climate finance, sometimes they sort of have a risk in terms of for the investor, basically. So the GCF comes, it is ideally supposed to co-finance. Like I said, co-financing began way back in 1992. So to co-finance this, the money that the GCF is supposed to provide is supposed to reduce the risk of a project so that other donors could of course potentially come in and finance that particular project. So the GCF is not supposed to finance the whole project, but supposed to provide financing basically to support, to basically attract other larger funding for climate change. And then of course alignment with sustainable development. I don't think of course we need to explain that, because sustainable development is of course embedded in the agenda 2030 of course agenda. Then I will try to explain the GCF result areas. So of course we have mitigation and adaptation. So under mitigation, the GCF looks at energy access and power generation. It looks at low emissions transport. It looks at forestry and land use. It looks at building cities and industries and appliances. Under adaptation, it looks at vulnerable people and communities, health and well-being, infrastructure, ecosystem and ecosystem services. So you can see under which category within adaptation and within mitigation, the GCF basically is looking to achieve. This is like their roadmap on guiding on, of course, these are the sort of projects that they're looking to fund, basically. We can move to the next slide. Okay, so we have the GCF investment criteria. We know that GCF has the public and also the pub. Okay, so when you look at issues of climate finance, for those who've read interacted with CPI report on landscape on climate finance, basically. So we have the private sector funding and the public sector funding. So you'll find that sometimes most of the resources comes from the private sector, and GCF has a private sector facility. Sorry, I thought this was sort of an introduction. Maybe in the next particular course, we could potentially unpack that. So the GCF investment criteria looks at the following aspect: the paradigm shift, the impact for potential, sustainable development potential, country ownership, needs of the recipients, efficiency and effectiveness. I can talk about a bit of country ownership. Country ownership is what I was sort of trying to explain when I was trying to talk about enabling environment. For GCF to be able to basically fund your proposal, you need country ownership, and country ownership is where you find you have to consult your GCF NDA, that's the focal person, to basically look at your proposal and see where it basically, if it aligns with the country goals and priorities. So that's something very, very critical and very important. So the GCF proposal so far, I think last I checked, it has approved around 2.4 billion for adaptation, mitigation 4.5 billion, and cross-cutting 3.1 billion. So that should come to about almost like 10 billion. But when you look at the landscape of climate finance, sorry, I didn't include this, by the global landscape of climate finance in general, you'll find that I think around 93% of financing has gone to mitigation, and only less than 5% has gone to adaptation. This is because, of course, mitigation tends to be more attractive basically to donors than adaptation, which of course should be a problem for African countries, given that our issue is not mitigation, rather it's a bit of adaptation. So even when you look at the GCF portfolio, it aligns with the report by CPI on the landscape of climate finance. You will see mitigation getting more resources than adaptation, because mitigation is more easy, is more attractive basically to the donor than adaptation. We can unpack that, I think, as we ask the questions basically. So the types of financing provided under the GCF, there is the non-repayable grants, so grants basically. Then we have non-repayable grants. I think most of the time it looks at issues around capacity building. So the more your proposal has a lot more to do with capacity building, the more you might get the grants, the grant bit of the funding, rather than, of course, the loan. Then we have the repayable grants. Then we have the high concessional loans and debt. Then we have the debt structures, junior equity and anchor capital, senior equity, and of course guarantees. So I think those are some of the financing provided. But I think the main issue within the climate change and climate finance discussions is that most of this funding, though it has been mobilized, most of it is loans, of course. And of course, as African countries, we know that we already have existing debt, of course, from the West, and we need more grants, but we see that we're having less grants and more loans. So that's basically a problem, basically, especially for African countries. So basis for decisions of concessionality. So concessionality is a form of loan or support, basically, that the GCF provides. Availability of other finance products would the project occur without the concessional resources, financial analysis, projected cash flows for sustainability, and then capacity of the borrower to repay, including the level of indebtedness. So this is more when GCF wants to give you a loan. So what they will look at is that, would you be able to continue with whatever project that you're doing, even without a particular fund? So this is something that is really a challenge, because as African countries, we're already in debt, where do you expect us to get more money? So sometimes it's usually a challenge. We can move to the next slide so that I don't dwell too much on this page. Okay, so the GCF, because I've talked about the GCF, the NDA, the focal point, I'm going all around. So we can sort of come back a bit and take a break and try to understand who are the stakeholders within, of course, the GCF. So sort of the GCF structure. So the GCF structure has the GCF board. So the board happens to approve, of course, the projects that are funding. We are happy that the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance is one of the organizations that actually sits on this particular board and helps get the projects approved. So when you apply for projects, eventually it has to go to a board that has global representation, and this board basically approves. And then we have, of course, the special committees, the secretariat that does the running around, independent technical advisory panel and accreditational panel. Then we have the regional advisors. So we have a regional advisor for Africa for each particular region to basically see whether the particular projects and programs align with the visions of the particular regions. And then, of course, we have the NDA. So who is the NDA? So the GCF NDA is the National Designated Authority. So this is the focal person, basically, through which the Green Climate Fund basically engages at national level. So if you write a project at the national level and you want to seek for funding to the GCF, of course, you have to go via the NDA. That's the GCF focal point. So the NDA basically, most of the time, it's basically the Ministry of Finance, or basically all the National Treasury. In some countries, it basically varies. And earlier I had talked about basically ensuring country ownership, and so basically the work of the NDA, part of it is to ensure that, of course, he's the person who's going to give you the no objection letter. So when you're given the no objection letter, it means that your country has approved, that the GCF NDA has approved that, of course, your particular project aligns with the priorities, and the country welcomes it and embraces it, basically. So you can go ahead and attempt to access climate finance from the GCF. So the roles of the NDA has been strategic oversight of national climate priorities, convene relevant national stakeholders, provide nomination letters for direct access accreditation, provide no objection letters for fundable projects and programs, approve and submit requests for readiness support. So I will explain each one of them about direct and indirect access, basically. So we have the direct access entities and indirect access entities. So direct access entities, so when you talk of climate finance, it's accessed in two major ways: direct and indirect access. Direct access is usually by national entities and organizations. For example, I think in Kenya, the direct access entity should be the Kenya Commercial Bank got approved to directly access climate finance. So other organizations, I think, such as the IUCN, have the indirect access modules to access, of course, the GCF. So coming back to how to access GCF fund project development process. So we have, of course, the adaptation and mitigation project. We have the readiness and preparatory support. We have the, of course, spontaneous submission, simplify the approval process, enhance direct access, project preparation support, and project preparation facility. When you look at, of course, adaptation and mitigation, I think we all know about adaptation and mitigation. When you look at readiness and basically the readiness support is getting the relevant documentations for you to start applying for basically the GCF. So readiness support is usually provided through, of course, the GCF NDA to each particular country. So each particular country is allocated an amount, basically, to support the country to be able to access basically resources under the GCF. So we can move on to the next slide. So I'm going to take you through the GCF project cycle, basically. So we have four key stages. So the first stage is the strategy, organization, and structure, where we have the country and entity work program. So basically, when you're applying for a GCF as an organization, you must be aligned to your country's program and work plan, basically, for that particular year. And basically you have to align yourself with your country priorities and goals. Then we have the target generation project. Then we have the concept note submission. So the concept note submission is different from the actual proposal. So the proposal comes a bit later. So this is the first step. Then the second step, the technical review and approval. So this is where you get to develop your proposal, the funding proposal development. Then of course the funding proposal is reviewed, of course, by within the secretariat, of course. So it's scrutinized and reviewed. Then of course it goes to stage 3. So approval and legal arrangement. So stage 3 is basically the board approval. So if your proposal, of course, has been reviewed by the secretariat, it goes back to the board, of course, which consists of course, not people who work with for the GCF, but stakeholders such as the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. So we have the board approval and of course the legal agreement. So if the board approves your project for funding, then of course legal due diligence has to be done for you to be able to access these particular resources. And then of course we have stage 4, which is implementation. So basically monitoring for performance and compliance, there's adaptive management and evaluation, learning, and project closure. So those are the 4 simple steps to accessing, of course, the GCF that you'd have to go through. Next slide. So I will take you through, this is sort of like the GCF concept proposal, how it looks like. So it has a bit of eight sections. So the first section is the project and program summary. So you get to summarize what you intend to do in an overview, then the project and information basically. So under the project information, we have the climate context rationale, the theory. I don't know if I cannot see my presentation clearly. So under the GCF, oh yeah, yes, we have the, sorry, just a minute. I'm having a bit of issues, yes. Yeah, I can see it now clearly. So we have the project and program summary. Then we have, of course, the information basically. So it's a whole. So under the information, we have the climate context rationale, the theory of change, implementation arrangements, justification for GCF funding, existing strategy and sustainability. Then we have the third section, financial information. Then we have the fourth section, expected performance against investment criteria. Then we have the logical framework. Then we have the risk assessment and management. Then we have the GCF policy and standards, which has environmental and social risk assessment, gender assessment. So gender is really strong within the GCF. Then the financial management and procurement. If I come back to number 2, we have the climate context rationale. I'll speak briefly again about it, so that in the interest of time. So the rationale, the key to really getting it right, when talking about the climate context rationale, you don't need to go into a lot of details about the history, like I have begun in 1992, all that. You have to talk about the climate scenarios, maybe in the recent 5 years, but don't go basically beyond that, and talk about the situation basically on climate change. From that, don't go too much into the history of that. So it fills up a lot of space that basically no one is basically interested in. Yes, the next slide. Yes, so requirements for funding to access. What do you need basically to access? So you need a couple of documents. Of course, you need the no objection letter from the NDA. So this is basically to basically look at is your project aligned with your national goals and priorities? So the GCF NDA, the GCF focal point, is the one who's supposed to look at it and say your project does align. And when he agrees that your project aligns basically within the national goals and priorities, then of course you may proceed. He gives you the letter of no objection, so you may proceed to get the other documents. The other one is the pre-feasibility study, which is usually the desktop study. Then of course the feasibility study depends on your project. Basically, maybe you're building a seawall, so you need a pre-feasibility study as well as feasibility study. Then we need the economic and financial analysis. Then we have a detailed budget plan, then implementation timetable, environmental, social, risk assessment and management plan, a summary of multi-stakeholder consultation and engagement. So multi-stakeholder engagement is really important within the GCF processes. Then we have the gender assessment and project level action plan. So the gender issue, they're also looking at, of course, the gender aspect when it comes to the specific GCF proposals that, of course, you want to be funded. Then you have the legal due diligence, and then you have the procurement plan, how you're going to purchase what you need to support implementation of that particular project. Then you have the monitoring and evaluation plans, how you're going to monitor it. Then we have the accreditation fee request. Then we have the co-financing commitment letter. When you talk about, this is a very important letter because when we began our discussion on the very first slide, we say that environmental financing is co-financed. So the national has to mobilize 60% of the resources to address environmental issues. Then the global community, basically the GEF was the first one. Then we have the GCF is supposed to provide additional financing. So you must have secured a bit of financing or have basically another financier who is going to support your particular project when you're applying for the GCF, and the GCF needs the commitment letter basically for this particular to be able to process your documents. Then of course we have a term sheet, certificate of internal approval, maps of project location, appraisal and due diligence, procurement procedures for third parties, of course, first level anti-money laundering and terrorism financial risk management, and of course the operations manual. So you can see it's a lot of documents, of course, that you need to have set in place before you can basically start to attempt to basically access financing. So I'll move on to the last slide. I want to provide you some, I sort of sieved most information because I look at it as we start as a basic introductory discussion. So I have more information, but I think we'll stop on at this next slide so that maybe next time we can build on basically more information about the GCF and unpack it. So the next slide, the final slide.
It's on.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So we have the fit for purpose accreditation. So under fit for purpose accreditation, basically, we have two key functions. We have the basic and the specialized. So we have the small, sort of the simple projects. Then we have, of course, a bit more complex sort of projects. Then, of course, we have the sizes of the project. So we have the micro, which ranges from 0 to 10 million US dollars. Then we have the small, ranges from 10 to 50 US dollars. Then you have 50 to 250, that's the medium size, of course, sort of funding. And then we have the large, above 50 million US dollars. So because most of these projects, they vary in size, basically. And then we have environmental and social risk categories. So we under the GCF, the projects are categorized under high risk, medium, or low risk. And then we have a mandate and track record aligned with fund's objectives, at least the 3 years of operations. So we're coming on to the next section, which is why accreditation. Accreditation is important because accreditation basically enables you to manage and deliver finance effectively and efficiently. So if you don't have an accredited entity, basically, we'll just be giving out money in the name of climate change, and we'll not be able to basically putting that resources into good use. We know that from COP26, we didn't meet the 100 billion US dollar, we were at 80 billion US dollar. And even within that 80 billion, access is still a challenge, is still a key challenge. So basically, we need an entity to ensure that the little available resources that is there is put to the maximum use. So that's why we need accreditation and accredited entities, basically. These are entities that will ensure that the available climate finance that is given to a particular country, a particular project, basically, they are put into, they bring impact, which comes to number 2, to develop impactful climate change programs and projects, and then ensure environmental and social risk are managed and opportunities to improve environment and society are maximized, strengthen gender equity, equality, and role of indigenous people, and then ensuring this can be done, whether the NDA should be the NDA is directly implementing a project or overseeing others. So this is the reason why we need the NDA basically to ensure that the money that is available, if we're lobbying for money at COP for the 100 billion that we didn't meet, the 80 that we met, we ensure that the 80, once you access it, is put into, of course, good use and use that is basically going to create a difference within the environment and climate change issues. Basically, the money is going to solve a bit of the issues. So key elements of a successful proposal, there's additionality of GCF funding. So for you to increase your success in your proposal, it must have an additionality, which means you should have it should be the GCF is looked as the additional financing for your project, not the main financing for your project. Then of course we have the country-driven approach, basically, whether it aligns with your national goals and priorities, then a strong climate rationale, of course, then the 6 investment criteria, then the 8 result areas that we explained earlier, then compliance with the GCF policies and completeness of documentation. So we don't want you to also apply halfway and expect and get tired along the way and then expect, of course, that you're going to get financing. So I think I can stop at that for now in the interest of time, and also so that I don't give you too much information that you get lost along the way. You can't study the GCF process and the UNFCCC process in one sitting. It may require you a bit more time than that. So I think I can leave it at that, and then I can open the floor to any questions.
All right, thank you, Dolphin, for the impactful presentation. We've really learned a lot on how to engage with the GCF processes, and as organizations, as CSOs, I believe we can now interact and engage with the GCF processes. So next on the agenda, we have the question and answer section, and I will be giving participants the space to ask questions. So please, if you have questions, kindly raise your virtual hand while I call on you one after the other so that we can quickly take questions and then Dolphin can provide answers to them. All right, yeah, I can see Billikis. Your hand is raised. Please, you have the floor. Please make the question as concise as possible because of time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Bilkis Ishola, Assistant Team Lead of Green with Green organization. Kudos to the presenter. It was actually very detailed. So my question is, when she spoke on the, and can you hear me? I just want to be sure that you're hearing me before I go on. Okay, so when she spoke on the GCF investment criteria, one of the things she mentioned was, she mentioned that for climate mitigation, that donors are usually more interested in that, so there are more grants for it, more than climate adaptation. But she said that this is a disadvantage for African countries because we tend to need adaptation more than just, if I'm mistaken, please correct me. She said African countries tend to need adaptation more than mitigation. So I actually want an explanation on this. Why do, if donors are actually more affiliated to climate mitigation and there are more grants for climate mitigation more than adaptation, why do African countries then need more of adaptation than mitigation? That's my question. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Dolphin.
Yes, I can answer that. Yes, so it is true that, let me make it clear. mitigation projects are more attractive to donors basically than adaptation projects, because mitigation project, let me make it very simple for you to understand. Imagine you're basically a buyer of a particular good and product, and when you come to mitigation issues, basically the donor usually has to account for their KPIs, so they're not just giving money blindly. When they give money, they have to account for that particular money. So when you look at mitigation project, the donor, it is easier to quantify mitigation than adaptation, because mitigation project, for example, let's say clean cook stoves, you can say we have supported 1 million clean cook stoves. There's a number, there are 1 million clean cook stoves. So it's easier for the donor to go back and justify giving money to mitigation rather than adaptation. Also coming back to adaptation, trying to explain adaptation. Adaptation is like giving money for you to, please don't be offended by this, giving money for things to remain the same, to make things better. It's sort of to make you feel better. There is no way of quantifying it and say, we have, the way in mitigation, you can say we have 1 million clean cook stoves. There is no quantification on adaptation basically. So it is sort of there is no quantitative value. It's more of a qualitative value. I don't know if you can be able to understand that. And mitigation and adaptation, mitigation basically has, like I said, from the report by CPI, Landscape of Climate Finance, basically, they have produced a couple of reports, the global landscape. 93% of the resources mobilized for climate finance 2018-2019 went to mitigation, because mitigation is sort of more attractive to the donor, because it is easier for them to be able to quantify it. And it is a lose for Africa especially, because Africa produces, mitigation is geared towards reducing global emissions basically, and Africans' global emissions, total global emissions, is less than 10%. So you'll find that we're the ones who have contributed the least to climate change, but no one also wants, and we're the ones suffering the most, because our issue in Africa is adaptation. How do we live with the effects of climate change? Because even at the national level, we have our existing issues and challenges. We have loans and grants, of course. We have loans, of course, from development agenda, and we also in the process of development. When you look at the other parties, the developed countries, they're basically blamed for climate change because of the industrial period, where during the industrial period, basically, we were basically not industrializing as Africa, as a continent. We were basically under colonial rule or something like that. So we hadn't taken up development. But basically, after the industrial period is blamed for climate change and environmental degradation. Now, after that, we in African countries, now that we've recently acquired our independence and we're starting to develop, basically, we are told basically you have to take a green growth pathway, and there is no financing. You cannot take the pathway that they basically took, of course, because by then no one really had raised alarm on effects on development on basically an environment. So you look at Africa, you're the one suffering the most because you're not developed and you don't have the resources, the financial muscles, like, of course, our counterparts in the West. And basically, and no one wants to give money for adaptation because they can't really quantify where this money is going to. I can just give you money for adaptation is basically to make you feel better. So adaptation projects, not most of the times, they are harder to quantify because it is looked as a qualitative value, and a quantitative value has not yet been put to adaptation. So when that will happen, of course, it might be able to attract, of course, more financing, of course, than mitigation. But yeah, so I think I can give the floor again back. Yes.
All right, thank you, Dolphin. I think I have a question in the chat box. I would read that out. Okay, from Nelly Umoren. Can mitigation and adaptation be linked in addressing climate change impact?
Yes, actually, yes. Because you look at, okay, when a project is basically funded, you'll find that some of the project, I think I forgot to mention, I should have shared, of course, the template basically. You'll find there are mitigation projects with adaptation co-benefits, basically. And then you'll find adaptation projects with mitigation co-benefits. So they sort of tend to intertwine and overlap with each other, basically. But most of the time you'll find the focus is mitigation. But these mitigation projects, of course, have adaptation as a core benefit, and adaptation projects, of course, have mitigation as a core benefit. Yeah, basically, yeah. So they can be interlinked. Definitely, they are interlinked.
All right, thank you, Dolphin. She also asked if it can be combined because we in Africa are not all that developed to carry out most mitigation strategies.
Thank you for that. So I should have mentioned something. Mitigation. It is not that Africa is doing at adaptation alone. When we began the, let's say, the roadmap towards the Paris Agreement, I think I should have unpacked that a bit. The Paris Agreement, of course, the countries are supposed to set something called the NDCs, basically. Because when I started explaining about Copenhagen, I mentioned that people are setting a temperature goal. Of course, that temperature goal is linked to, of course, is linked to your nationally determined contribution. So your NDCs is basically a global, is part, contributes to the global mitigation goal. So your emissions reduction is, of course, a mitigation agenda. And that is something that has been at the front line because it is something that began in Copenhagen when we were trying to set up on the roadmap towards the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement, it was not just people went to Paris and they agreed. It began way in 2009, and then people developed and discussed it more. And then, of course, in 2015, we agreed, of course, we're setting the temperature goal at 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees below the levels in the pre-industrial period. So when your country sets your NDC, NDCs are basically a mitigation out. So your country is already contributing towards mitigating, of course, its emissions. So as developing countries, of course, most of the things that
Hello. I think she's having network issues. All right, does anybody have any question? If you have a question, kindly raise your virtual hand while I allow you. But I think Dolphin is trying to connect again. She's having network issues. Please kindly indicate if you have a question while she tries to reconnect. All right, we are running out of time, and since there are no more questions, I think we should move to the next thing on the agenda, which is closing. Or does anybody have any comments regarding the presentation? Okay, in the absence of none, I would invite Mr. Lao Abiodun to give a closing while we round off the training.
All right, great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, so thank you very much to all our participants and all those who joined to this session. We are indeed grateful to everyone who stayed through. And most especially, we want to thank our guest speaker and presenter, Dolphin Magero, who has taken us through the rudiments of understanding the UNFCCC Climate Finance. And this is a very rich conversation. And we have had different understanding about the Paris Agreement, the GCF, and the project and programs, and also what you need to understand about the GCF funding proposals. So I believe everyone will be expecting the slides from today's program, which I believe will also get to you all. And you also have a better understanding of what she has said today. And today's program, again, is quite significant because today marks the World Earth Day 2022. And as an organization focused on environmental activities, we are using this medium to also extend the greetings to everyone from all around Africa and the world by extension. And we want to charge you all to also take charge of the environment, because this year team talks about investing in our planet. So investing in our planet means that we need to take action, not just action, conscionable action, to ensure that all that we are doing is geared towards saving the planet from environmental disasters, including climate crisis. And all of this that we are all putting forth in this program or in this training is to also equip us with the necessary understanding about climate change and climate action. And so going forward, we will also be having this training subsequently in other months. This is the month of April edition that we are just concluding today. We have had different ones in the past, from January, February down to March, April. So next month, we also want you to make it a date with us again, where you also learn more about climate finance. And on behalf of the executive director, who is also in this training session, Ms. Tislopengo Zakosa, she has once asked me to tell you all to keep on participating in our programs, especially this program on climate finance, so that we can all contribute our action to the progress of our society, and most importantly, our immediate community. Hi, Jumoke, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hello? Okay, great.
All
So
right.
I'm done. I think we are just
Okay.
we are good to go. So thank you, Dolphin.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Lau. I think Dolphin is back online. I don't know if she has anything to say before we round up.
Just to thank you for this opportunity, thank you for this platform, and I think it is a very great engagement, and I look forward to further future discussions so that we can both learn and share about issues of climate change and climate finance and GCF and the different funding mechanism. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dolphin. We've been impacted by today's training, and I want to urge us to keep participating in these monthly capacity building, as it will help us to engage more in climate finance and GCF processes. Also, next month would be the 32nd GCF board meeting, and we would share all information about the board meeting, and we urge every one of us to participate so that we can further engage with the GCF. So I thank you all for participating in today's meeting, and hopefully we would take on more trainings for the subsequent month. Thank you so much. All right, please kindly fill the attendance form if you have not done so that the presentation slides can be shared. And also an evaluation form would be shared with all participants, and we can do well to fill the form and give our feedbacks through the evaluation form. Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you so much to the organizers. Just a question. This recorded, understand that this meeting is recorded. Would the recording also be shared?
Yes, once you fill the attendance form through the link, you would get the recording and the presentation slide. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
I would send the link to the attendance form again before I end the meeting.
They only break it for you.
So please, if you've not filled the form, I would share it again in the chat box. Kindly use the link in the chat box to fill the form. Thank you.
Okay.